Hey, it's day 73 of a screenwriter's journey, and this being a relatively long day of writing, as I'm looking at my length of my timeline in Premiere Pro, I can see that maybe I'll get something done here. So we finished yesterday with the idea that Justice Martinez has found the number of the Motel 6 and more exactly the room where they're staying and is called to say, Holly, what in the world, what are you doing there? And get her off her butt and try to kind of spin the screenplay into gear or put it into gear. And I guess that's kind of a metaphor for what I was trying to do is just come up with something to get this thing going because I just felt like it was just muddledy duddledy do there. Um, so the upshot, the final result is Gary says, "What did she say? Don't you dare get on that plane until Lexi's safe." All right, so at least it's going in a new direction, or at least it's got some oomph to move it forward. Whether that's going to work out or not, you can make a comment on, or you don't have to. You can just think, I wonder if it will. Does this seem like a good thing or a bad thing? All right. So I'm going back and kind of making little adjustments based on this new little sub scene or part of the scene. Come on, baby, get past page 64 or whatever it was. Any chance you could call the FBI? So now, still, Rachel, unless she's lying, made it appear that she has a deal with the FBI because Lexi has said, hey, well, can you call them and tell them it's not going to work out? So, yeah, so they, I had mentioned several episodes ago that when you leave a scene with a cliffhanger and then don't resolve it for two or three scenes later because something else has happened, you run the risk that when you come back to that scene, people go, "What? What was the cliffhanger? What is being responded to here?" And that's kind of what happens when that scene on top of page 60, the interior trampoline park, when Rachel is talking about um, being upset. I understand you're being upset. All right, so now I'm going backwards to page 56. Um, I'm just, again, trying to make it. You're always trying to add to the conflict, add to the drama, add to the urgency. Obviously, you always want to leave scenes having moved the story ahead and putting them into a new dynamic. You don't want to have kind of the, I guess, emotional energy, for lack of the better term, the same at the beginning of the scene as the end of the scene, or really, what's the point? I mean, you can give out a bunch of exposition, but it's generally better to really have something else happen other than just that. Okay, so thank goodness I have fixed this to some extent, at least as far as I'm concerned. I understand you being upset. Look who passed Parenting 101. To me, I'm a little biased, but I think that, that kind of tells us what Abby is thinking. Um, Hold on. Oh, all right. I'm going to come up with some new dialogue here. Watch this. Yeah, just watch me go. So, yeah, because this is, yeah, okay, here's the new dialogue. Trying to get on. So now the idea is that I believe, and I didn't see myself make that change, but the idea no longer is that Rachel has got anything cooking with the FBI. She's purely all in with the mob. And based on that, when Rachel says, "Hey, look, don't you think I agonized over this?" She's talking about the whole thing, whether to get her daughter involved, how best to try to impress her, et cetera, et cetera. And all that Lexi can think of based on what's happened so far is that she's basically Rachel has sold her own daughter out to the mob for some reason. And so Larry picks it up from there, basically. And again, I'm not going to just sit here and read the dialogue because you can read it. But to me, that his lines, they're a little bit funny, but basically he's predicting what he thinks is going to be happening based on the new information that they got from Rachel. And as I've said, almost any time I come up with this new dialogue, it takes me a couple passes through to make it acceptable so I can go on and then, of course, come back and fix it as needed. So that's what I am trying to do here. And it is kind of neat when you look back and see what you wrote. And again, this is like 5 weeks later. And then you can kind of go down the rabbit hole of, wow, how did I think of that? Whether it's good or bad, it's like, where did that idea come from? Living on the private island, being the cabana boy, etc. And I think it has to fit the story. It has to help the story, but it also has to be something the character would say. And, Larry is sort of a little flippant, a little glibby or whatever, compared to his brother, who is much more serious. So I think that works. I hope that works. All right, so this scene to me is more or less taking shape. It's taking better shape finally. And I think it's going to end pretty much the same. Rachel kind of in a weak sort of way, you can just picture the way she says that, and I won't attempt it because I'm not an actress. But, and again, I'm not going to direct, giving parenthetical information. I'm not going to direct the actor or the director how I think the actor should deliver the line. The only time I think I've mentioned that I would do that is that if it's, at least in my mind, you want the line delivered just obviously way contrary than what it would seem to be delivered as. And even then, you're on the risk because what if that is just totally off-putting to who's ever reading the script? And they get to that point and they picture it being delivered one way, and then you've directed it being delivered another with parenthetical information. So I still do it, but I don't do it as nearly as much as I used to. And what I do use parenthetical information for is, if someone's going to yell, you have to say that unless it's obvious. If there's several people in the room and you're not sure who they're talking to, you have to use it. And then a beat or listens or something like that. Obviously, it's just basically stage directions. But in terms of, delivering the line cocky or sarcastic or sure of himself or something, if you have to do that, then I think that's kind of a crutch that you should get rid of. All right, so now I'm back to the scene that I started writing the other day where Justice Martinez is calling because she's found out what is going on and that Holly's not on the plane, and basically calling not to yell at her, but just to understand what's going on. So Abby gets on the phone and talks to her, which, as I said, in some circumstances, the typical teenage movies, which this is not really a teenage movie. It's not really meant to be that. In fact, I was thinking today while I was on a bike ride what genre this is, and I don't even have a log line for this. So certainly if you do have a good log line for this, of course you're not going to know until the script is finalized, but go ahead and put one down in the comments, and if it's really good, I will borrow heavily from it and thank you for that. That will be the extent of my obligation, however. All right, so that scene ends with Holly telling the others what the justice said, which is basically don't leave there without Lexi. And Holly calls Hogan, and we find out how this came to be, how the justice came to call. And yeah, it's, again, it'd be super interesting to know if anyone is watching this and reading this and go, wow, that's brilliant dialogue, Jack. You've done it again. I'm not saying that this is going to change next pass through, but I'm not saying it won't. So this is sort of, I don't specify it here, but it's sort of intercutting between the two, because Hogan has heard that her priorities are straightened out. So, hey, that means you're ready to go back to the airport. And then keep your calendar open. So I'm going back, and I use intercut quite a bit. And frankly, the reason I do that is to save space on my scripts, and as opposed to saying interior so-and-so, and then they have a line of dialogue, and then exterior so-and-so, and they have a line of dialogue. Whenever it goes back and forth, really more than once or twice, I mean, almost, well, not every phone call, but majority of the phone calls, unless you just purposely want to hear one side of it, and you're going to see both people, then I do a lot of intercutting. And I mentioned this before, several episodes ago, the whole idea about how many phone calls you should have in a script. Or, I mean, if it's bad to have too many, because you don't see people face to face and you don't see the drama and stuff like that. And I think there's a ton of phone calls in this script just because there has to be, and I guess I should be watching that when I watch TV shows or movies to see how many phone calls take place. And maybe it's not a big deal. So there's Gary's line near the bottom of page 65 about the pizza, and that was the whole idea of kind of foreshadowing, not really twins ESP, but how much they think alike, which I guess is sort of ESP, but and then the whole thing of Holly saying, I get the bed, you get the chair, and then Gary talking about the breakfast. So I haven't cut this out yet, no. And so, yeah, Gary's got the crappy cereal dispenser. Gosh, it's just crazy because it feels like I wrote this. It's like 5 weeks ago from the day that I am recording this voiceover. But man, it feels like longer than that. Just, it's weird. So, yeah, so we've skipped, 12 hours or 10 hours because it was never really night the previous day, was it? Even those scenes at the Motel 6 were, I mean, I haven't really totally done the math in the timeline, but it couldn't have been more than 6 o'clock at night because they talked about eating dinner. So 12, 13 hours are passed. And so they're getting into this conversation about taking a bullet, which I know I've had in several previous drafts, so I won't really dwell on that part too much. And I really do like this thing that Gary says on the bottom of 67, where we can see he's super concerned about Lexi, obviously, but he's saying, do I see Larry? I can't not ever see him again. And when you fall in love with dialogue, it's always dangerous. And sometimes it's actually you've written a line, whether it's 2 words or 10 words or whatever, that you just think is so spot on or so clever. And then it's typical, I've heard and I've experienced, that you just hang on to it and hang on to it, and you go, oh, I got to work it in somehow because it's so good. And that's usually a sign that it needs to go. There's something about like killing your babies, obviously not literally, but you know what I mean. So, yeah, as much as I like that, that may just have to go. Or maybe it won't because it fits. So in this version, Abby has not found the match on the computer, which I think makes more sense. So basically, probably they ate dinner. They came back to the hotel room. Well, I mean, think about it. What did they do? They ate dinner. They came back to the hotel room. They stared at that screen while Abby was trying to find a match, and then they fell asleep. So that's a reason that something might have to change. Yeah, that secret crush part. I mean, again, it's kind of funny-ish in a way, but maybe not. Well, the good news is I'm up to page 70, and I've sort of run through, at least for now, my troubled area. And last night I dreamed 4 of us went extra. Yeah, I do like that part still. The bullseye was a picture of my mom. Oh, gosh, I just realized something. Anyways, so they get up the next morning, and which is fine. They have a brief conversation, and then I look on here, and I'm on page 70, 70 minutes in, and again, I'm hoping this is going to be 107, 108 pages, which right now is 108. So Act 3 is going to start about page 82, 83, and so again, back to the save the cat. If we're well into the bad guys close in, then what's got to happen is what? All is lost. And then Night of the Dark Soul. Dark Night of the Soul. I always forget that. It's got to be Night of the Dark Soul. And then the break into 3. So I'm thinking out loud here. Have the bad guys really been closing in? The two, Lexi and Larry, are at the tramp park, and they've talked to Salerno, who is a bad guy, but Rachel, of course, as we've discussed, is truly the antagonist. And is she really closing in? What do you think? Leave a comment. All right, let's get back to the script here. So, yeah, Rachel, there is this scene, shoot, that I'm just finishing in the trampoline park where, gosh, I apologize for that. Lexi ends up, after getting slapped, grabs her mom, and, remember that if you see Holly. In response to Rachel saying, remember that when you meet your grandfather. So now the 2 guys have come to get him. And I think they have. The 2 guys, Clyde and Ace, have come to get him. And now I'm really bouncing around all over the place here. When you guys write, do you bounce around this much? Or do you just like plow straight through and then you make a grand pass sort of and come back again and just go through the whole thing? That would really be interesting to know, because I never, at least in the last, I don't know how many years writing, I've never been able to do that. And I don't know that it would be a good or a bad thing, because I mean, when something changes and you know it needs fixing, you might as well go back and fix it right away instead of thinking, well, I can't change that until I come back and make another pass through my script. Yeah, so now they're, instead of like being in the little kitchen area, they've come back to the room. And I'm not exactly sure. It's funny how I search for text that I know I wrote or dialogue, and then I come back and fix it. All right, so Abby had asked Gary about taking the bullet and all that, and Gary sort of pseudo answers, and then there's a but, and then Abby conveniently finds the location right there. Or not. You found it. So got it. Holly comes out. You find it. Comes closer. Does the same comparison. How far from here? 2.5 miles. See, that doesn't make any sense. She says SOB on the bottom of 67. And then she considers, what is she considering and what idea is she getting? Oh, wait a minute. Great minds. Oh, gosh. You've ever heard that line? Great minds think alike. That is a sign of sloppy and lazy writing, if you ask me. So it's the next morning, and it appears the DNA tests have come back. But again, I just feel like I'm getting into too much chitter chatter and not enough forward momentum. Especially, yeah, it's especially interesting when you look back with some perspective, and maybe you've changed it since then, and it's like, why did I even write this in the first place? Why didn't I just write the good stuff? But like a lot of things, sometimes you got to write bad stuff to get to the good stuff. Go see my brother. So I'd still have that line of dialogue there because I like it a lot. The other thing is, especially now with, everything's on a cell phone, if they even use cell phones, smartphones, whatever, that it's so easy to put the call on speaker. And so that kind of adds an interesting dynamic. It's like, at what point would a person logically put it on speaker? In this case, Holly did. In other cases, maybe she put it on speaker, but she didn't want the person on the other end to know that the two people were there, but she wanted those two people to hear the conversation so she wouldn't have to repeat it, because, you don't want to repeat something you've already said, or you can do it off screen. But I think in that case, it made sense that they were on speakerphone. In this case, since the others are going to be joining in the conversation, then speakerphone, obviously they're not going to just pass the phone around. That would be kind of silly. All right. So Gary has his little moment there. The problem is, I think I'm running into, whenever I see like a slug line, or I should say person's name, and then I don't immediately write dialogue under it, I know that something is amiss. The other thing, oh my gosh, I apologize again. Now it's past 10 o'clock at night. But anyways, the other thing is, when you were working out a story, and this goes to the whole subject of, would Salerno really come to see Lexi? Would he not just sit at his mansion, behind guarded doors and fences and walls, and just wait for her to come, wait for his men? And I think that's kind of how I had it originally. But obviously, A, it's not nearly as interesting, and B, it would require a lot more story to take place. And if the FBI truly is tracking them, which they intend to, would they really be able to do it? Assuming it would involve like a car ride to an airport and then an airplane ride and then another ride to get to his house and all that kind of stuff. I think if this was a series and you needed to make this last 8, 10, 12 episodes, certainly you could do something like that. And that's kind of the neat part about series is that you can take more time to develop the characters. You don't have to rush everything in an hour and 40 or 50 minutes or something. Definitely a big plus, but on the other hand, you have to do a lot more work to write 10 episodes than a feature, you would think. So while I was saying all that, in the script I haven't really done a whole lot. I started going down that tangent of saying, would Salerno really come? And somewhere along the line, I justified it to myself for the sake of the story and for the sake of what I picture Salerno being, is that he is really eager to see her in person. You know, he saw her on the FaceTime call, but I just made the call, so to speak, that he would be the type of person to come. And really, since the FBI, well, he's pretty much wiped him out, and obviously there's more FBI around and U.S. Marshals, but he's going to this airport that he doesn't think that they necessarily know about, and you know, he's got protection with him and everything, and he wants to see her. So hopefully that's not a big sticking point. All right. Oh my goodness, I've been on this page forever. How much longer Salerno matters? We don't know. No plus 3 team. That they wait. So again, I'm just trying to kind of figure this out. I do know 100% for a fact that this sequence, I don't believe, was in the original note cards or the index cards. So, yeah, so the whole problem is I made this plot point of them finding out where the kids are, and then there's no payoff to it because Hogan probably knows, or maybe he doesn't know, but either way, are they, the two of them, really going to go and try to bust into the place and save the day? I mean, they certainly could, but I never really intended for that to happen. So what am I really setting up here? I guess that's the question. So Holly calls Hogan because she wants to see if he can come back, and Hogan is saying, please tell me you're not still there. And then, yeah, the idea that Hogan doesn't know where they were where they are being held. Even if I knew, Noble would. The old famous dash dash dialogue, meaning someone interrupts them. So I'm obviously going back and fixing something here. Do you want to see a previous character? You think I'm pretty for my other side? Yeah, that line of Holly's, and for a kid who thinks he's all that, you're really not. That just, please get rid of that. Please, 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 please. Please delete it. No. Come on, get rid of it. Whenever I have it highlighted in blue for a while and I don't do anything, that can be a bad sign. But a good sign, maybe. What do you think? I do like You Think I'm Pretty because that kind of throws Gary for a loop, and, it carries on this little thing, which I'm not saying, by no means, I mean, this isn't like Cougar Town or anything. Yeah, I got rid of it. But I kind of play and experiment with how far, how many references I should make to this little non-existent thing. And usually, as I've said, less is more. I feel like I got to put this microphone up higher. I feel like I'm leaning down into it a lot. Oh, so now, yeah, see, they're back in the plane, and I'm just going to experiment with this microphone live on YouTube. It's not really live. I'm going to make it even higher. Ooh. So maybe this is the first time I've introduced the idea that instead of that whole pretty bit, which there still is some of that they're in an airplane after all. No, I've had this in there before about the parachute and back. And then maybe that foreshadows the fact that Holly could use it later as like a daring thing, which sounds pretty cool. And I like that idea. So don't be disappointed if it doesn't happen, but you can be pleasantly surprised if it does. But then, of course, there's the whole thing of when you come up with new ideas, how are you going to work them in without seeming to force it? Because as we know, once you change one thing, typically it's the domino effect and you have to change a whole bunch of other stuff. And is the other stuff that you change motivated simply by that one little bit? And typically you get yourself into more problems than you solve, typically. Okay, here we are back on page 60. I had made it up to about 73. And it's funny how, like that, it's a free country. I feel like I've written that line literally 10 times, and instead of copying and paste it, I keep rewriting it literally. Literally. All right, so we still have our dialogue here with the justice. So it's survived about 2 days of writing, or 3 days. Okay. So this, I'm just reading. Nothing much is changing here. All right, so now I'm back to this whole idea of what Hogan and Holly would really talk about. And could Holly talk Hogan into taking her to the place that they're being held? But Hogan's counter argument is no, because we're going to take care of it, so don't sweat it. Oh dear, I'm really jumping here. You're still in town. I need to ride. The hour expired last night. Even if I knew Noble would have my job. Whoop, I'm searching for DNA. Don't know why. Okay, so that didn't really cut down his line, but that kind of set up the fact that there's really nothing literally that can happen between now and then, because the DNA test won't be back, and so they're not going to take him until then, because if it's not his granddaughter, he's just going to either have her killed or who knows what. I think I've used that same line of dialogue 3 different times, and I keep erasing it and putting it back. Sometimes that means that when you keep coming back to something that, hey, this really is working, or sometimes it means it's just your crutch and you're using it because you can't think of anything else. This is day 73. My mind is wandering as I'm looking at the changes I made, and I'm just thinking of what a miracle it would be if someone has actually watched the majority of these and has gotten used to how I just jump around in the script. And are you, it's sort of like a soap opera. Oh, I'm done for the day. I mean, are you interested at all in the story, in my process, in the journey? There's definitely being ups and downs. I'm not saying huge like emotional crashes, although maybe I've got one of those that will be coming up, maybe not. And again, doing all this voiceover in retrospect, I'm not in the heat of the moment and feeling like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I had thought of like doing one sort of live writing session, but that could be colossally boring and kind of forced speaking out loud as I'm writing, although it could be interesting. Anyways, day 73 is in the can. I made some progress, but then I went back and made some changes to account for some of that progress. So that's kind of how it is, at least for me. But after you've liked, shared, subscribed, and watched The Key on Amazon Prime, and The End of Art free on YouTube, come on back for day 74 because there's going to be some more.